On September 15, 2020, Israel signed peace agreements with the UAE and Bahrain at a White House ceremony that religious leaders immediately called historic. Not because it brought lasting peace, but because it started a clock, a 7-year clock. We're now 5 years and 3 months in. And what happened during this time frame should make you pause. The October 7th, 2023 Hamas attack on Israel became the deadliest assault on Israeli civilians in modern history. It occurred roughly 3 years after the signing. That's close to the midpoint of a 7-year period. Daniel's prophecy describes a 7-year covenant that breaks at the midpoint, triggering catastrophe. September 2020 to September 2027 is 7 years. If these accords are what Daniel warned about, we're approaching the final phase, and the signs are already visible. But before we connect those dots, you need to understand what Daniel actually said. Daniel 9:27 is one sentence, but it's been debated for centuries. Here's what it says. He will confirm a covenant with many for 1/7. In the middle of the 7, he will put an end to sacrifice and offering. 1/7 means 7 years. That's established Hebrew prophetic language, and many scholars believe this describes a future peace agreement, not just between two nations, but with many, a coalition. Sound familiar? Now here's where it gets specific. The prophecy says this covenant gets broken at the midpoint, 3.5 years in. That's when catastrophe strikes. Sacrifices stop. The temple gets desecrated. All hell breaks loose. This midpoint isn't gradual. It's sudden. It's violent. It's the trigger for what the Bible calls the Great Tribulation. So let's do the math. The Abraham Accords were signed September 15, 2020. Add 7 years. That brings us to September 15, 2027. We're currently 5 years and 3 months into this timeline. The midpoint would have been March 2024, right around 3.5 years after signing. Now watch this. October 7, 2023 marked the deadliest attack on Israeli civilians in decades. That's roughly 6 months before the calculated midpoint, close enough to raise questions, and it shattered the peace the Accords supposedly created. Here's what we need to ask. Was that attack the breaking point Daniel warned about? Or are we still approaching it? Because if the Accords are the covenant, we're in the second half now, and the prophecy says the second half is worse. Now let's talk about the phrase covenant with many. Daniel doesn't say a covenant with one nation or two. He says many, multiple parties, a coalition agreement. The Abraham Accords initially involved Israel, the UAE, and Bahrain, signed September 15, 2020. But the agreement didn't stop there. Sudan and Morocco later joined, normalizing relations with Israel. That's 5 parties to start. The United States brokered and guaranteed the deals. That's 6. But here's where it gets interesting. Before October 7, 2023, Saudi Arabia was actively negotiating to join the Accords. The U.S. and Saudi Arabia had reached understandings during summer 2023 regarding what Israel would concede to Palestinians for normalization. Secretary of State Antony Blinken was planning to visit Israel in early October 2023 with the framework document. The deal was close, very close. So we're looking at 7 nations potentially involved. Israel, UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, Sudan, United States, Saudi Arabia. That's many nations, a coalition. Exactly what Daniel described. Now, watch what happened next. The Abraham Accords represented a significant diplomatic setback for Hamas, and the advanced Saudi-Israel negotiations in 2023 threatened to further sideline the Palestinian cause. Derailing these normalization efforts likely served as a major motivation for the October 7th attack. Let that sink in. Hamas leadership has explicitly stated the Accords were a reason for the attack. On October 6, 2023, the day before the assault, normalization talks between Israel and Saudi Arabia were advancing under the Abraham Accords framework. The Middle East was moving toward integration. Economic corridors were planned, trade routes opening, and then October 7th happened. The deadliest attack on Israeli civilians in history, and the peace process shattered. Here's where the prophetic timeline becomes impossible to ignore. Daniel says the covenant breaks at the midpoint, 3.5 years in. Let's do the math again, carefully. September 15th, 2020 to March 15th, 2024 is exactly 3.5 years. That's the calculated midpoint of a 7-year period ending September 2027. The October 7th, 2023 attack occurred roughly 6 months before this calculated midpoint. Some might say that's close enough. Others would say it's not exact. Here's what we know for certain. On October 7th, 2023, Hamas launched a coordinated surprise attack with at least 4,300 rockets and 6,000 militants breaching the border. It was the deadliest attack in Israel's history, and it completely derailed the peace process the Accords created. Despite the tragedy and ongoing war, the Abraham Accords are still standing. The agreements weren't officially torn up, but functionally, the peace is broken. In November 2023, Bahrain recalled its ambassador to Israel. Economic cooperation slowed. Defense partnerships cooled. The normalization momentum died. Was October 7th the breaking point Daniel warned about? Or are we still approaching it? That depends on whether you're counting from the signing or from when Saudi Arabia would have joined. Either way, we're in the danger zone now. This brings us to another biblical warning that connects directly to our timeline. Paul wrote in 1 Thessalonians 3:5-3, "For when they shall say peace and safety, then sudden destruction comes upon them." Notice the sequence. People declare peace, they feel safe, and then destruction comes. Not gradually, suddenly. That's exactly what happened. The Abraham Accords were celebrated globally as historic peace. World leaders praised it. Media called it breakthrough diplomacy. Israel, the startup nation, was feeling increasingly safe in its neighborhood after the Abraham Accords were signed. The covenant created a sense of security, and then came the sudden destruction. Hamas militants breached the Gaza-Israel barrier, attacking military bases and massacring civilians in 21 communities. Families slaughtered in their homes. Music festival attendees hunted down. Over 1,200 killed. 251 taken hostage. This wasn't just a military operation. It was designed to shatter the illusion of peace, to prove that the Accords hadn't solved anything. They'd just papered over a spiritual conflict with political agreements. Here's what most people missed. The peace the Accords promised was never going to last because it ignored the core issue. This isn't about borders or politics. It's about covenant land. It's about promises God made thousands of years ago. And any human agreement that tries to resolve divine promises through secular negotiation is building on sand. The Accords promised peace and safety. October 7th brought sudden destruction. The prophetic pattern played out exactly as Scripture warned. We're watching it happen in real time. So, if we've passed the midpoint, what does that mean for right now? Daniel's prophecy says the second half of the 7 years is worse than the first. Much worse. This is when the tribulation intensifies, when global chaos escalates, when the stage gets set for the final confrontation. Look at what's happened since October 7th. The conflict hasn't stayed contained. The war spilled over into Houthi attacks in the Red Sea, escalation between Iran and Israel, and nuclear tensions in the Persian Gulf. Regional instability exploding. Nearly a year after October 7th, tensions escalated between Israel and Hezbollah. Multiple fronts opening. The economic impact? The India-Middle East-Europe economic corridor that was planned before October 7th effectively froze after the attack. Trade routes disrupted. Global supply chains threatened. The promise of prosperity that came with the Accords? Reversed. And here's the part that should alarm everyone. We're still 21 months away from September 2027. If the Abraham Accords are the covenant Daniel warned about, we're in the second half right now. And prophecy says this period gets darker before it ends. The question isn't whether bad things are happening. They obviously are. The question is whether we're watching random violence or prophetic fulfillment. Are these birth pangs or just political conflicts. If Daniel's timeline is in play, what we've seen so far is just the setup. The breaking of the covenant at the midpoint triggers events that build toward something much bigger, something that involves not just Israel, but the entire world. But the Abraham Accords timeline isn't happening in isolation. Look at what else is converging right now. Economic instability across major nations, record debt levels, banking system vulnerabilities, the global financial order showing cracks, natural disasters increasing in frequency and intensity, earthquakes, floods, wildfires. Jesus called these birth pangs, signs that increase before the end, and they're accelerating. Geopolitical power shifts, the rise of authoritarian systems, digital surveillance expanding, social credit systems being tested, the infrastructure for global control being built in real time. Technology that previous generations couldn't have imagined now makes prophecies about total economic control actually feasible. And here's what ties it all together. There's a growing call for unified global authority. People want someone to fix the chaos, to bring order, to guarantee peace and safety. Sound familiar? The Abraham Accords fit into this larger pattern. They're not just about Israel and Arab nations, they're about regional integration, economic corridors, normalized relationships that pave the way for broader cooperation, the kind of framework a future global leader could leverage. Daniel's prophecy specifically mentions a leader who confirms the covenant, not creates it, confirms it, takes existing agreements and strengthens them, makes them official. That requires existing relationships, existing frameworks. The Accords provide exactly that foundation. We're watching pieces move into position, not just in the Middle East, globally, systems being established, alliances forming, the stage being set. And we're 5 years into what might be the final 7. So, are the Abraham Accords the 7-year covenant Daniel prophesied? Here's what we know. The timeline aligns. September 2020 to September 2027 is exactly 7 years. The covenant involves many nations. 5 signed, more were negotiating. The peace broke near the midpoint. October 7, 2023 shattered the security. The second half is worse. Regional chaos has exploded since the attack. But here's what we don't know yet. We won't know for certain until September 2027. That's when the 7-year period completes. That's when we'll see if this was the covenant or just a dress rehearsal. Either way, you need to understand something. Whether the Accords are the fulfillment or not, they've proven one thing. A 7-year peace agreement involving Israel and multiple nations is possible. It can happen. The framework exists. The model works, at least temporarily. And if not these Accords, then what comes next might be. Because the pattern has been established. The pieces are in place. The stage is set. You have less than 2 years until September 2027. Less than 2 years to watch this timeline play out. What happens in those 21 months will tell us everything. Will another major event occur? Will the conflict escalate beyond the region? Will a global leader emerge to confirm and expand these agreements? Daniel's prophecy doesn't end with the 7 years. It continues into the tribulation, into the rise of the Antichrist, into the final confrontation between good and evil. And if September 2020 was year 1, then September 2027 is the end of the beginning. What comes after that? That's the part that should terrify you.